Marlon Brando, I mean, the name itself is legendary, right? A titan who totally reshaped acting, a cultural icon, and a man who commanded Hollywood's biggest paychecks. But behind that myth was a story of just profound contradiction, a life of incredible wealth and talent that was shadowed by this deep, deep sense of disappointment. And to really get it, we've got to start with a number. So when Brando died back in 2004, this is what his estate was worth, nearly $22 million. Now, for you and me, that's an insane amount of money. The kind of fortune that signals a life of just unquestionable success. And it seems to fly in the face of reports from his final years that he was basically broke.
And that is the mystery we're going to try and unpack here. How could a movie star who's sitting on a $20 million estate feel like he was just scraping by? How could one of the highest-paid actors of his generation feel like a victim of the very system that made him so rich? That right there is the paradox of Marlon Brando. Okay, so to solve this puzzle, we really have to dig into Brando's, let's call it, complicated relationship with money. He was an absolute master at getting it, but keeping it, well, that was a completely different story. And there is no better example than one of the most legendary deals in movie history.
By the late 70s, Brando's star power was just off the charts. He could make demands that other actors couldn't even dream of. For the role of Superman's father, Jor-El, he filmed for just 12 days. He was on screen for less than 20 minutes. And for that tiny slice of work, he didn't just get a salary, he got a payday that made history. Let's break this down, because it's wild. First, he got a cool $3.7 million up front. But here's where the real genius move was. He also secured 11.75% of the back-end profits. And then, when he felt like he was being shorted on that cut, he sued the producers and walked away with another $15 million. It was an absolutely staggering amount of money for just a few days of work.
And this just perfectly sums up the mindset, right? Brando's agent, Jay Cantor, he put it bluntly. For him, it wasn't about the art anymore. Not really. It was a straight-up business transaction. Brando leveraged his fame with this cynical precision that made him incredibly rich, but it also just fueled his resentment for the whole industry.
But here's the thing. For every one of those brilliant deals, there was a massive financial blunder just waiting around the corner. This number, this represents the estimated amount of money he lost on what might be his most famous film. It's a shocking figure that really shows you just how volatile his financial life was.
So here's what happened. Brando's original deal for The Godfather gave him 10% of the profits. But late in the game, he needed some quick cash, and he sold that stake back to the studio for just $100,000. Just think about that. One single impulsive decision cost him what we think is around $10 million as the film became an absolute legend. He was a master of the deal, but also, so often, a victim of his own short-sightedness.
But look, the money was only part of the price of hiring Brando. The real cost of getting him in his later years wasn't just financial. It was paid by, well, pretty much everyone on set. So before he even stepped on the Superman set, Brando had some, let's just say, unique ideas. I mean, he actually argued that since nobody really knows what people from Krypton look like, why couldn't his character Jor-El just be a floating green bagel or a suitcase with just his voiceover? The director Richard Donner thankfully talked him out of it, but it was a huge red flag showing how checked out he already was.
So you've probably heard this one. Brando famously refused to memorize his lines. Instead, he'd have them written on cue cards or fed to him through a secret earpiece. His reason, his artistic justification, was that it kept his performance fresh, spontaneous. But his co-star, a young and very serious Christopher Reeve, he saw something else entirely. To him, it was his hero just phoning it in, a man who simply didn't care. Get this. A young Cary Elwes, who would go on to become a huge star, was just a teenager working as a production runner on the movie. And he remembers that his main job was basically to be the Brando wrangler. He had to lure Brando out of his trailer, usually with food, especially desserts. It just paints this picture of a guy who's completely uninvested in the multi-million-dollar machine that's revolving all around him. And this whole earpiece thing, it reached its most ridiculous, most absurd peak on the set of The Island of Dr. Moreau. His co-star, David Thewlis, said that Brando's receiver would sometimes pick up the local police radio, and Brando would just start repeating what he heard right in the middle of a scene. Can you imagine? You're trying to act, and your scene partner suddenly blurts out, "We've got a robbery over at Woolworth's." That was the reality of working with late-career Brando. But Brando's on-set behavior wasn't always just quirky or unprofessional.
In one infamous case, it crossed a line into something much, much darker, a really profound ethical line that has frankly stained his legacy and the film itself forever.
So to really understand what happened here, we need to talk about a really important concept: informed consent. Basically, it's all about respecting a person's ability to make their own choices. You have to tell them what they are agreeing to before it happens, especially when it involves something that could be harmful or distressing.
So during the filming of the 1972 movie Last Tango in Paris, the director Bernardo Bertolucci and a 48-year-old Marlon Brando, they planned a simulated rape scene. And here's the crucial, awful part. They deliberately did not tell the 19-year-old actress Maria Schneider about the specifics of what they were planning. The idea was to capture her genuine, real-time reaction of shock and humiliation on camera. And the director's reason for this? It was chillingly direct. He said he wanted her reaction as a girl, not as an actress. He wanted to provoke a real emotional response. He wanted her to be genuinely humiliated. By doing that, he and Brando just treated her like a prop for their art, not a collaborator.
And the effect this had on Maria Schneider, it was just devastating. And it lasted her whole life. She said later that the experience left her feeling humiliated and, in her own words, a little raped, both by Marlon and by Bertolucci. It was a profound betrayal that haunted her and stands as a really dark chapter in movie history.
Okay, so how do we tie all of this together? The financial wizard and the financial fool, the genius on screen and the chaos on set. It all comes back to where we started, right? That big paradox? The guy with a $21 million estate who felt totally broke. Well, the numbers, they definitely tell part of the story. So even though he grossed something like $50 million during his big comeback years, that money just got eaten away. Nearly 20% of it went straight to agents and lawyers. Millions were poured into his private island in Tahiti and into child support. And of course, that one terrible deal on The Godfather cost him $10 million. His huge income was always fighting a losing battle against huge expenses and some really bad calls.
But you know, it was more than just the math. Brando had this deep, really conflicted feeling about the money. He hated the Hollywood machine, but man, did he love the cash it gave him. He became this pioneer of negotiating profit-sharing deals later in his career, but he always felt that the system had cheated him early on by only paying him a flat fee for his classic films.
And all of this, it leaves us with one final big question. Look, his talent was undeniable. Nobody can argue with that. But his legacy is this tangled mess of genius and, well, self-destruction. He fought a system he thought was exploiting him, but his own actions created chaos and caused real harm to other people. So what do you think? Was Marlon Brando a victim of the Hollywood machine that chews people up, or was he, in the end, his own worst enemy? It's a question that continues to define one of the most fascinating and flawed legends we've ever seen.